What no one's ready for after the apocalypse. Story 1. Natural disasters would become far more dangerous without modern warning systems. Even a minor thunderstorm could trigger a massive blaze. Levees would fall into disrepair, leaving them weak and unreliable during floods. Gas leaks caused by earthquakes or tornadoes could spark uncontrollable fires. Overall, natural disasters would be much more frightening than they are now. Story 2. Infections. Any little cut is very easy to contaminate if nowhere is ever cleaned, and there's dirt, gore, and rotten flesh everywhere. Even without zombies, people who die aren't likely to be buried in certain areas, and there's a good chance that wounds from grazing or cuts would be able to disable that part of your body, or end you. I mean, no clean water and no clean anything means you're guaranteed some sort of infection. Story 3. I think one thing most depictions overlook is that there are already parts of the world that resemble post-apocalyptic conditions, places like Chad, Sudan, and Uganda. In those environments, strongman warlords rise quickly, and human society doesn't collapse entirely. It just reorganizes into brutal systems. Instead of lone groups of good survivors fighting cannibal raiders, the reality would likely be massive refugee camps controlled by organized militias, battling other militias for access to resources like food, clean water, medicine, and territory. On top of that, there would be constant conflict driven by ethnic, religious, and racial divisions, basically what we already see in modern failed states. Another frightening thought is how the balance between crime and law enforcement would break. Criminals would still have 21st century tools and knowledge, while anyone trying to uphold order would be stuck with 15th century means. Counterfeiters could easily exploit working computers and printers. DNA evidence would no longer matter, and toxic substances or biological weapons would go undetected. In short, it would be a terrifying and chaotic world. Story 4. You rarely see anyone carrying water. Humans need at least a kilogram of water each day, more if they're constantly on the move. Yet most shows depict people wandering around without even a canteen, let alone the 4 to 5 kilograms of water they actually need to survive. You can't just depend on stumbling across a water source either. There's no guarantee you'll find one, and even if you do, it might not be safe to drink. Story 5. The need for social interaction and mental stimulation often goes unnoticed. If your plan in an apocalypse is to bunker down in your shelter with your lifetime supply of beans and corn, more power to you. But you'll go crazy if you're alone and don't have anything to read or occupy your time with. If you're with your family, you'll need ways to keep a daily routine, so it would help your mental health to know the difference between night and day, or devise some sort of fake determination yourself, not to mention having some supply of games or books, something. Story 6. Supplies. Most shows make it look like ammunition and other vital resources are easy to find, but in reality, once production stops, you'd be lucky to gather enough to stay alive. But I actually think it would be the other way around. Take The Walking Dead for example, a good show, but one that missed the mark on this point. The gap between the normal world, before Rick is shot, and the post-apocalyptic one he wakes up to is incredibly short, maybe a month at most. By then, the population had dropped by over 80%, so how could there possibly be a shortage of supplies? Even if factories stopped producing instantly, such rapid depopulation means that only a small fraction of non-perishable goods would have been used. Hoarded, sure, but not consumed. The US alone manufactures around 4 billion rounds of .22 long rifle ammo every year, and back in 2013, producers were making about 1 billion rounds weekly across all calibers. Story 7. Food, food, food. Do you know how to grow food? Do you really? Do you know how to harvest and store it? You can't hide crops growing in a field. You have to abandon them or defend them when the hordes of starving armed people come to get them. You think you can rely on hunting to feed yourself? You can't, especially when everyone else is hunting for survival too. Working just to get enough food to eat took the majority of our efforts until a few hundred years ago. With no stability or law and order, most people would die as soon as the canned food in the area was used up, if not before. My grandparents are farmers, so if there's ever an apocalypse, I think I'd go to them. They have their own wells and generators to farm, the knowledge of how to service them and farm in general, and lots of access to weapons and ammo. It's rural, so not as many people or zombies to face down, and they farm way more corn and beans than a single family needs to eat. Plus, everyone in the area is a nice farmer, so I'm sure they could come to some sort of community agreement on how to band together and farm everything needed. Story 8. It seems that no one ever addresses what goes into walking. Not many of us walk very far now, and in the event of trying to escape a city on foot, it is often overlooked. The closest big city is 1 hour and 45 minutes away by car, but 68 miles as a bird flies. You could conceivably walk it in 3 days if you're fit, but you would have to be conditioned to walking that amount. Your feet would have to adapt to the use and develop calluses. Until people shed those extra pounds, immense joint pain would accompany the blisters. Every remaining part of your day, when you weren't looking for food or evading zombies, while you traveled, would be spent on the care of your feet. Your feet would literally be the difference between life and death. Story 9. A quick apocalypse is going to leave things like nuclear reactors, nuclear waste pools, and large industrial facilities unstaffed, and they will quickly fail. Fukushima Daiichi killed every reactor on Earth and the cooling ponds for on-site nuclear waste boiling off its water and catching on fire. Large industrial sites and refineries are likely to leak and or catch on fire, so we'd have Bhopals and Texas City disasters all over the world. Oh, and exploding grain elevators and grain bins too, starting fires that aren't fought. Oh, and forests and wildfires going like mad in the first few years. To decades. Story 10, gasolines become practically useless in a year or so. Only learned recently myself that gas has a use by date before it starts messing up car engines heavily. Especially zombie fictions completely bypass this fact in their narratives about survival, with motor vehicles staying the preferred means of transportation many years after the collapse of society and any reasonable access to oil refineries. Story 11, people seem to be stuck on the notion that apparently every single person on Earth absolutely needs some kind of drug for basic survival. I'm quite sure that it's a very small percentage of the population, and they would probably die quickly. Sure, some well-stocked families might hunt around to find drugs because of love, but most would simply die, and we'd be back in a world where evolution would be sorting out the genetically deficient for that world. When basic survival is as difficult as it would be, I don't think anyone would have the resources, or motivation, or know-how, or will to find or produce non-essential drugs. Also lots of hygiene and talk. Outside of sanitation for medical reasons and basic hygiene, I doubt people will be thinking much of reproduction. My opinion. Story 12, The Stand, did a good job of this, I think. I'm listening to the unabridged version. There was the die-off from the superflu, and then a second die-off of people who were immune but not smart enough or just unlucky, to keep surviving. The woman whose old, unused gun blew up in her face when she tried to use it. The drug addict who got a hold of some uncut heroin from his dead dealer's house and OD'd. The guy who got appendicitis. Living through the apocalypse is just half the battle. Story 13, I think it's strange that people believe if we lost cities or electricity, we'd be screwed. Modern cities have only existed for a century or two. Most of human existence has been without modern comfort, and our ancestors did just fine. And brainless zombies versus normal people. Please. We have millions of years of evolution that were selected for our ability to survive. That apocalypse would be fairly short. Did just fine. People used to die at 40 or from minor injuries. It's not just comfort. What about knowledge? Think of all the progress humans have made in the last decade or so. To go from that to simply trying not to die would be such a shame. Story 14, Teaching how to survive. Most of the time, either there's one person that already knows how to do everything, or they find a town that works together. If one of my friends got stranded in a forest for a week, we'd be looking for a body. Zombies break out, and you end up getting separated and stuck with 3 other morons that can't start a fire without gasoline, a lighter, and some strong wishing. You're gonna die. Honestly, if I had to pick a trade in the post-apocalyptic era, it'd be teaching people basic survival and sending them on their way. Story 15, you can't rely on guns forever. Even in the United States, not everyone stockpiles thousands, if not millions of rounds of ammunition. That's why it's important to know how to make and use bow and arrows, rather it be one you kept or one you make. Also, even if you manage to keep ammunition stored at perfect temperatures, assuming you somehow have powers and parts to maintain an air system, Even the best of guns can only be shot so many times before they get worn out. It might take centuries, but it will happen. If you go to gung-ho all the time, years and your guns will be worn out. Unless you know how to make guns and have the tools and stockpiled materials to do so, eventually, you're going to have to revert back to step 1 in human hunting. The bow and arrow or the spear. Story 16, just general urban uselessness. I couldn't start a fire to save my life, let alone hunt or trap a damn thing, which would still require skinning and prepping whatever to actually eat. And I should add that unless what I'm about to drink smells like pure piss, I can't be entirely sure that I shouldn't drink it, or the proper way to filter it. So yeah, dead pretty quick. Seriously though, not that the above aren't true, but they're lame to see in a story, I think. A while back, I remember reading some stats somewhere on just the standard rotation or refresh rate for food in any major city. I may be completely wrong about this, but I think most cities hold enough food to sustain their total population for a couple of weeks at any given point. Not much longer than that, meaning when the system breaks down and no more grub is delivered to any huge urban area, that's just millions of people in a very tight space in a very bad mood. Story 17, there would be no food. It's really hard to create food in a city, much less an apocalyptic one. All dystopian stories take place in cities. There is no farmland, nowhere to raise animals or grow vegetables. Half of the food we normally eat probably can't even grow in that climate. Life in these dystopian cities would be completely unsustainable just because of the lack of food. Sure, you could grow a little garden and maybe get some veggies, but you still have no source of protein or carbohydrates. And yet it's always colonies living in cities. Story 18, scarcity of toothpaste and toothbrushes. I mean really every single character in every single post-apocalypse thing I've seen, short of actual zombies or monsters, has absolutely perfect Hollywood teeth, like bleach white teeth. Can't find oil or water or basic necessities. Nope, can't even keep your face clean with all the dirt and muck on it. But apparently toothpaste is just brought to people by the toothpaste fairy. I mean, is it super hard to get some yellowish paint that wouldn't end someone to apply to enamel? It's just distracting when they're all mucky and grimy and everything sucks, until you're blinded by the sheer whiteness of someone who slightly opens up their lips. Story 19, music. You realistically wouldn't be able to listen to it or play it safely anymore. If you had it play out loud like a radio or speakers, it could attract the wrong kind of attention and your senses would be impaired. You could never hear someone sneaking up on you. The same goes for headphones. It wouldn't draw attention, but you definitely never hear someone sneaking up. I guess you could use just one headphone, but that side of your perception would be off or at risk. It'd be far and few between for situations where you could safely listen to music. Story 20, Matt L. Jones, Badger from Breaking Bad, was on Talking Dead, show that comes on after The Walking Dead, where they discuss the show. This past fall, and he made a point that the only thing these people post-apocalypse seem to be worried about is walkers, but they aren't worried about a staph infection or other common health maladies. Think about it. What would you do in those circumstances? You would be done. Break your leg, done. Gash that requires stitches, done. Fever and need nutrients, done. Story 21. For one thing, there aren't enough spiders in The Walking Dead. Not nearly enough. Zombies stink and spread filth, and it's a post-apocalyptic hellhole where trash should be everywhere. Septic tanks have burst. Plus, nearly every human is a rotting breeding ground for maggots. There should be a population spike in flies, meaning an abundance of food for spiders. Plus, nobody keeps the spiders at bay. Every back road that Rick Grimes drives down should have webs everywhere. Every house should be covered in spiders and webs. It should be almost as bad as the walkers themselves. I seriously feel that's an over-prediction of the sheer amount of spiders. However, the rats would be everywhere. There would be a lot of mold and bugs and rabid dogs and cats, and there's also more birds, probably, due to the lower number of people. Also fungus all over the place. Story 22, I watched a video a long time ago that talked about the psychology of this kind of situation. Basically, it stated that no matter how prepared you think you are, there will be a group of people who will realize the situation they are in and act in a manner that is completely alien to you. Just as when the Allies were invading Germany and they started using women and children as basically cannon fodder. These people will act with little regard for human life. be it their own or someone else's, because in this group of people a switch has been turned off. They realize they are doomed, so any act that may increase their likelihood of survival is not beyond them, no matter how depraved or insane it may be. Sure, you might be ready for the physical aspects of survival, but are you ready for the mental and psychological facets of this situation? I'd say likely not. Story 23, so gasoline, right? People in all kinds of post-apocalyptic worlds where the refineries no longer work, drive cars and other vehicles that would require gas. But the thing is, gas degrades over time, so have fun Mad Maxing it up in the dystopian future where no gas is available. Another consistent thing is this inane idea that a dystopian government wants its population to be smaller because that makes it easier to control. That's not how it works at all. Smaller populations equal weaker governments because smaller populations necessitate smaller militaries, smaller research teams, less politicians, and less of the industrial base that you need to have for a strong government. Story 24. Pots. Get a pot. They are the real difference between life and death in a post-apocalypse world. Even if you survive the horrors of the apocalypse and make it some safe area, you need water. The human body needs water every 3 days to survive, and that's not even going into the dehydration and exhaustion that would set in long before, which would keep you from getting more. Imagine a days-long hike on an empty road with nothing to help keep you going. Even if you found a town at the end of the day and made a plan to get supplies, the exhaustion of having none to start with could easily get you killed. You sure as hell also shouldn't count on clean rivers or lakes. It's a pretty well agreed upon fact that in this type of world, fires would rage uncontrollably. Now imagine for a moment a 1,000-acre forest fire. Now think about all that smoke and soot coming back down and polluting every open clean water source within a 100 miles, and this would be happening everywhere. With pots, any source of water can be cleaned by boiling it. Sure, rain is clean water, but are you really going to depend on it to rain every other day until you come across a reliable source of water? And even when it rains, how are you going to collect it if all you have is a rifle and a backpack? Plus, put anything in a pot of boiling water, and it will be sanitized, not just food, but also medical supplies and anything else you need to be cleaned. In an emergency situation, it can also be used as a makeshift melee weapon. If I'm ever in an apocalypse situation and only have time to grab one thing, it'll be a pot. I know this doesn't exactly answer the question, but I'm just dumbstruck how I've never watched a movie or read a book where the main characters understood how the pot is a survival necessity. Story 25. Most post-apocalypse stories assume a distinct before and after. The apocalypse happens in one day. I think the reality would be worse and way more complicated. After the end, it's easy to decide to fire your machine gun at the cannibal hordes. But what if you believe the old world might still come back, that there will be law and order once again? Now your choices aren't so easy. Rome didn't fall, it declined. Year by year it got worse until people eventually realized, I guess it's over. But really it had been over for many years already. Story 26. Depending on the nature of your apocalypse, the first and most pressing problem would be potable water. Is there any left? How much? How close is it? Can you make a shelter close by so that it is handy? Are there any other survivors around who will need to share it with you? Is there even enough to share? You can live longer without food than you can without water, so you need a source that you can rely on. You will have enough stuff to worry about later, so get that water first. Story 27. It seems a lot of people missed shelter, whether it is a situation like the Book of Eli or any number of zombie movies. Our modern housing sucks for containing or maintaining temperature. Buildings would need to be smaller with some form of a hearth. Assuming the zombies have basic senses, guns would be absolute crap to use. You can hear gunfire from a mile off, easily making it so you have 10 minutes optimistically for you to move on quietly. Blunt and edged weapons would be your friend, unless you live in the middle of Kansas or some other extremely rural part of the world. Another thing people fail to recognize is shoes. Unless you have really high quality boots, most modern shoes wouldn't last more than 6-9 months of high use from moving, hunting, and all the other daily tasks. There is so much that goes into a wandering lifestyle of an apocalyptic scenario. My preferred apocalyptic would just result from a global EMP leaving most modern technologies useless. It would force people to sprawl or die. Then we would endure the same struggles that people had to deal with a few hundred years ago, except for some better weaponry. Story 28. In movies, 55-gallon drums on fire seem to be everywhere. Unless you decide to wheel them in from industrial zones, you're not going to find that many. Also, those stupid gloves with the fingers cut off and long trench coats, which are the fashion statement of haute couture and post-apocalypse futures, would not be as easily available. Gloves, maybe, but those expensive oilcloth long coats, I bet those would fetch a nice carton of cigarettes. Another cliché of the post-apocalypse world. Story 29. The eventual meltdown of everything nuclear, the power plants in particular. I had this thought too. I do work with nukes here and there as a contractor, so I know that there are protections in place to automatically scram the reactors when the crap starts hitting the fan due to lack of humans. That being said, there are 450 or so operating nuclear power plants in the world, some in places like Ukraine and China. So who's to say how well they have been constructed and subsequently maintained? And who's to say what happens when some silly little valve somewhere doesn't seat properly, or some wiring was made with poor quality shielding and the reactor can't shut itself down properly? Not to mention that if power fails somewhere and the backup generators have no fuel source, then someone's really up crap creek. Story 30. Most people don't work at anything that produces stuff, and most stuff that is made requires highly advanced technology. A post-apocalypse scenario bounces us back to, say, 1800 tech. Most of us don't know crap about how things were back then, much less how to manufacture the necessities. Coding skills are useless without a computer. Advanced medical know-how depends on advanced diagnostic equipment and drugs. The point is, our modern society is a system in which we are cogs. We don't know how to be cogs in another system.